What was your thoughts on passing prior to taking on this role? And then how did this character inform your thoughts of passing?
Wow. Well, it left me with more questions than it did answers. That's for sure.
Say my name.
3 years ago, Hailee Steinfeld could absolutely be bought and sold as a slave.
These pretty teens are best friends, and they're also something else. Something that may surprise you.
With twins.
This is Hailee Steinfeld. She's an actress, singer, and a star in some pretty big series such as Hawkeye and Spider-Man. But recently, she's been in the headlines in social media not for just her acting, but for her racial identity. See, in Ryan Coogler's critically acclaimed Sinners, great movie by the way if you haven't seen it, she plays Michael B. Jordan's love interest, well, one of them technically. And in the movie, and this is minor spoilers, it's revealed that she's actually part black due to her maternal ancestry, specifically her grandfather was half black. And historically, and canonically in the sense of the movie, that would technically make her black due to something known as the one-drop rule. Now, the interesting thing here is that wasn't just a plot point, right? That was actually based on her actual lineage, her actual ancestry. And now, people across the internet are asking, is Hailee Steinfeld black? Which is a question I'm going to try to shine some light on today. Let's get into it. Now, before I actually answer this question, I think we need to take a brief intro to metaphysics. Okay, let's say I hand you this, right? It's metal, has 4 prongs, you use it to eat spaghetti. You'd probably say this is a fork, right? Okay, but what if it only had 3 prongs, or maybe 2? Okay, still a fork, probably, right? But what about this? Or maybe this? The point there is, at what point does it stop becoming a fork, right? At what point is it no longer a fork and entirely something else? And that's the concept of metaphysics in a nutshell. It's not just about what things are, it's about what makes things what they are, right? And where do we draw the line? What separates one thing from another, and why do we draw that line? And we can apply that same concept to race. In fact, we do all the time. So the question here is, what makes someone black, right? Is it ancestry, skin color, just the way you look in general, or is it something deeper, right? Just like the fork, someone might look black or someone might not look black, but the way we decide today seems almost ambiguous, right? Now, to get a bit more insight onto this, we need to go back in time a bit to something called the one-drop rule, which I mentioned earlier, and that's really how we define blackness in America for a very long time. And the concept is this: if you had any black ancestry, pretty much any at all, even like a great-great-great-grandparent, back in the 19th century, essentially if you had any African ancestry, you were considered black. The important thing here is that there was no real nuance, right? It wasn't really even based on skin color. If you had African ancestry, you were black. It's pretty much cut and dry, just like that. To give you a bit of perspective on this, check out this photo. This is from an 1864 issue of Harper's Weekly, and a lot of these kids look like white children, right? At first glance, you might be tempted to think, oh wow, it looks like, black and white kids getting along. But this is not a portrait, right? These are slave auction ads. At this time, all of these children were classified as black. Obviously not because how they looked, but because they had some African ancestry somewhere up the line. Fast forward to today though, you ask anybody on the street which of these children are black, we're all pointing to my man right here. Here's the thing though, the one drop rule, though maybe, not in effect the same way today, it still kind of is in our culture, right? It's still part of the way we talk about things, how we talk about race, and how we talk about each other. So that's why, when Hailee Steinfeld says she has some black ancestry and someone says that, yeah, she's part of the black family, you have to stop and think, well, wait a minute, technically, maybe she is, maybe she's not. She allowed to the cookout. There's a lot there because historically she would indeed be considered black, as you can see from the photo. 200 years ago, Hailee Steinfeld could absolutely be bought and sold as a slave, right? But unlike 200 years ago, the big difference now is that being black, or what's defined as black, seems to be almost entirely based off appearance, or maybe more specifically perception, which is exactly why we have such a hard time kind of categorizing people who claim to be black, have black ancestry, but may not necessarily look the part. For example, let's take Walter White.
Say my name.
No, not that one. The real Walter White. He was the head of the NAACP in the early 1900s and spent the majority of his life fighting for black Americans. Here's the thing though, Walter White had blonde hair, blue eyes, as you can see in this photo, and could easily pass for a white American, and a lot of times he did. And he would use his ability to pass as white to really investigate racism from the inside. So he would investigate lynchings, infiltrate, Klan meetings and white supremacy groups in general, and really do his best to kind of combat racism from the inside. However, despite easily passing for white, he never really claimed to be white, right? He identified as a black man, fought for black people, and spent most of his life advocating for black rights. So in light of that, who am I, or really anyone for that matter, to deny his blackness just because of his appearance? Now, unfortunately, I do want to get into just a bit of lingo here, a bit of parlance and how we kind of talk about this topic. Right, there's a bit of a difference between who is white passing. So if you're white passing, what that means is you look white, maybe multiracial, but you look white and you kind of identify as white. Whereas white presenting is more so you look white, but you don't actually identify as white. You kind of accept both parts of your ethnicity. So Walter White, in this scenario, he was white presenting. So he looked white, but he never claimed to be a white man, and he fought for black people. Although I have to say that is a very unfortunate name for a man in his position. But anyways, with Walter and with Hailee, these people who, have this African ancestry, but don't, visually fit the idea of what it means to be black today. What do we do with their claims, right? What are we supposed to say to them? Do we accept them? Do we acknowledge their existence, or do we say, no, you can't be black because you don't look black? I think another great example is the set of twins you may have heard about.
These pretty teens are best friends, and they're also something else. Something that may surprise you.
We're twins.
Believe it or not, they're twins.
Yep, we're twins. We're
same
twin
mum,
sisters. Same dad.
You heard right. They have the same mom and dad.
Now, obviously, the darker one here, no one's going to question the sister's blackness. It's just not going to happen. However, her sister here, can she claim the same blackness? I mean, should she even? Especially when her sister cannot claim the same whiteness as she can. Now, I'm not going to pretend I have an answer to this question. I really don't know. I'm just raising the question. Maybe though, if she does identify as black, the issue isn't that she's identifying as black, but maybe we're just too stuck on what we think black has to look like. On the other hand though, while it may seem unfair to deny someone their blackness based on how they look, they do benefit from a world who treats them as white, right? That's just no denying it there. And that benefit is not small, right? And fundamentally, it's antithetical to the black experience. Now, I'm using air quotes here because obviously, like all people, black people are not a monolith. There is no singular black experience, but there are some common reoccurring themes between our stories. Going back to Walter White, obviously, he fought for the cause, but there was definitely things he was able to do that most black people would not be able to do at the time, right? Like he investigated Klan meetings, he infiltrated. Can you imagine what would happen if I walked into a Klan meeting? Exactly. And he certainly may not have chose those privileges, but he still had them, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. So while someone may embrace their black identity privately and even publicly, the privileges that they carry publicly do matter, right? And they affect our perception of them. To put it really as plainly as I can put it, this is simply not going to be the face, or this is not going to be the face of someone when they say a black suspect was caught doing X, Y, and Z. Privileges and presentation and appearance, it all matters. And especially for folk that are more, we'll call it phenotypically black like myself, it does raise a bit of attention, a bit of a question about, okay, do we draw the line somewhere? Do we need to? Especially in America, where being black isn't just, not necessarily about who you are, but also how the world treats you, right? Today's day and age, no one's gonna check your lineage, no one's checking your DNA. It's just, do you look black enough? And in that way, ironically, I think being black is something that's been defined more so by white America than black America, or at least equally so. And this really isn't just theoretical, right? This way of thinking, this idea of, this is a black person versus this is a white person, and where we draw the line, it's been pretty studied, right? So this Harvard study took a look at how people categorize people today, especially biracial folk, and this is what they found. In almost all instances, black and white people are more likely to categorize mixed people, biracial folk with evenly black and evenly white ancestry, as black. Now, this is a concept known as hypo-descent, which is the founding idea, the underlying idea of the one-drop rule. Essentially, what that means is if your ancestry is mixed with a lower status group, society will assign you that lower status group as your identity. The interesting thing is that same idea of hypo-descent, right? So when people assign you that race of the lower status group, that same thing didn't happen as often with Asian and white mixes and Latino and white mixes. The main takeaway here is that as a society, we still see blackness as something that marks you, right? That identifies you socially and visually. Whiteness, on the other hand, we see as something that's a bit more fragile, right? And as soon as something else touches it, it disappears. So bringing this all back to Hailee, is she black? Once upon a time, yeah, she would have been. I mean, the movie Sinners, technically, she was. But modern day, I don't know. It's still up for debate. Well, people might say that, yeah, she's just mixed ethnicity, but technically we all are, right? Everyone in America, for the most part. I myself am 10% white, but I would never claim whiteness because it just would not make any sense. And it wouldn't make any sense not because I don't have the ancestry, because, I do. It's just that the experience is not there. And same thing goes for Hailee, right? No one's denying her black ancestry, but does her life reflect, the struggles and biases that a lot of black people in America, or phenotypically black people in America, have experienced? I think one thing black people in particular are kind of wary of is people, ignoring being black their entire lives and then stepping into blackness when it's cool or it's profitable. So it's a bit natural part of our culture to want to go ahead and gatekeep that. And I think at the heart of it, that's kind of the real question, right? Does it matter if Hailee Steinfeld's black? No, not really. I think what much more so matters is how long are we going to keep drawing these lines between black and white, right? What exactly are we trying to protect here? And maybe more importantly, who are we afraid of letting in? If you saw the Sinners movie, that's a pretty fire line. Anyways, that's it for this episode. I'm your host, Vermillion. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. All right, bye.